Children who grew up watching Bird became parents, then grandparents. The NBA changed, Boston changed, and Larry Bird changed with it. That is the part of his story that highlights rarely show. They show the young Bird celebrating a championship. They show him pointing toward the bench after hitting another impossible shot. They show Magic Johnson standing across from him. They show the player. But they rarely show what happens when the player disappears. Because Larry Bird spent much of his adult life trying to defeat limitations. Eventually, he had to live with them. And the physical price of his career was only one part of the story. The harder question was what happens to a man whose entire world was built around competition when competition is no longer the center of his life. That is where Larry Bird's later chapter becomes much more complicated. For Larry Bird, retirement did not mean the end of basketball. But it did mean the end of something much more personal. For most of his adult life, his body had been a tool. He used it to compete, to run, to shoot, to absorb contact and keep going. He pushed through injuries because that was what Larry Bird did. Eventually, the body stopped cooperating. The back problems that had followed him through the final years of his career became impossible to ignore. Bird missed 22 games during the 1990-91 season because of a compressed nerve root in his back. He underwent back surgery, but the problems continued. During his final season, he missed 37 games. And that is where the story becomes more complicated than simply saying an athlete got injured. Bird was only 35 when he retired. 35. For a normal person, that is still young. For an NBA player, it can be the beginning of the decline from the physical peak. But Bird had already spent more than a decade asking his body to do things most people could never imagine. The heels, the back, the constant pounding, the long seasons, the playoff battles, the falls, the accumulated wear. By the time Bird walked away in 1992, he had already achieved almost everything a basketball player could achieve. 3 championships, 3 MVP awards, Olympic gold, a place among the most important players in NBA history. But the body that had carried him there had started collecting the bill. Years later, Bird gave a revealing interview about getting older. At 60, he was asked what he could no longer do physically that he missed. His answer was surprisingly simple. Running. He said he missed being able to get outside and run 3 or 5 miles. Because of his back, he could no longer do that. He used an elliptical instead. He even admitted that although he had complained about running while he was doing it, he missed those ordinary runs once they were gone. That small detail tells you more about aging than any statistic could. The saddest losses are not always the dramatic ones. Sometimes they are ordinary. Going for a run. Getting out of the car without thinking about your body. Moving without calculating whether something will hurt afterward. For someone who spent his career moving almost instinctively, those changes matter. And Bird was honest about another part of aging. He said what frightened him most was not knowing exactly what getting older would bring. That uncertainty is something almost every person eventually understands. But Bird experienced it after spending his entire life being viewed as physically and mentally extraordinary. He had built an identity around control. On the basketball court, he could control the pace. He could control the ball. He could control the pressure. He could decide when to attack and when to pass. Age does not negotiate that way. You cannot talk trash to it. You cannot outthink it. You cannot hit a game-winning shot against it. And you cannot ask the coach for another possession. After leaving the court, Bird found another way to remain involved in basketball. He became a coach. In 1997, he took over as head coach of the Indiana Pacers. In his first season, Indiana reached the Eastern Conference Finals, and Bird was named NBA Coach of the Year. He coached the Pacers for 3 seasons, leading them to the NBA Finals in 2000 before they lost to the Los Angeles Lakers. Then Bird walked away again. The reason was partly personal. Bird had made a promise to himself that he would coach for only 3 years, and he kept it. It was another example of something unusual about him. Larry Bird had never seemed comfortable pretending to be someone he wasn't. He knew what he wanted, and when he felt his time was finished, he left. But basketball was not finished with him. In 2003, Bird returned to the Pacers as president of basketball operations. This time, he was not responsible for scoring 30 points. He was responsible for building the team. for evaluating players, for making decisions, for thinking several moves ahead. It was almost the perfect second career for someone whose greatest gift had always been understanding the game. And Bird was successful. He helped build Indiana into a contender and eventually became the only person in NBA history to win the league's Most Valuable Player award, Coach of the Year award, and Executive of the Year award. But even then, his health and his desire for a different life influenced his decisions. In 2012, Bird stepped down from his position with the Pacers. The decision was connected to health concerns at the time, and he took time away from basketball. He returned to the Pacers in 2013, and eventually, in 2017, he stepped away from the full-time executive position again. This time, Bird was very clear. He said the decision had nothing to do with his health or the team. He was 60 years old, wanted to do other things away from basketball, and planned to remain connected to the Pacers as an advisor and scout. That distinction matters, because it is easy to look at a famous athlete's retirement and assume something terrible must have happened. Sometimes it is much simpler. Sometimes a person has simply reached the point where they want a different life. For Bird, that meant stepping away from the daily pressure of professional basketball. The man who had spent decades inside the NBA machine no longer needed to be at the center of it. He could watch. He could advise. He could attend games. He could talk basketball. But he did not have to live every day according to the NBA calendar. And that quieter existence may be one of the biggest changes in Bird's life. Imagine the difference. During his playing career, his schedule was dictated by games, practices, travel, reporters, teammates, and opponents. Every performance mattered. Every injury became news. Every mistake could be replayed. Every great game could become part of basketball history. Then suddenly, the games stop. The crowds stop. The locker room disappears. There is no coach telling you where to be. No teammate waiting for you. No opponent trying to embarrass you. No championship waiting at the end of the season. There is just life. And life after professional sports can be strange for athletes who have spent their entire identity inside competition. Bird was fortunate in one important respect. He never completely lost his connection to basketball. Even after stepping away from full-time work, he remained associated with the Pacers and continued appearing around the basketball world. In 2024, he was back in the spotlight for the opening of the Larry Bird Museum in Terre Haute, Indiana. The museum brought together pieces of his high school, college, and professional career. There were photographs, memorabilia, stories, interviews with people who had shared different chapters of his life. And Bird himself spoke about the experience. What stood out was not arrogance. It was gratitude. He talked about the people and communities that supported him along the way. He acknowledged that he did not make the journey alone. That is an interesting image of Larry Bird in his later years. Not Larry Bird screaming at an opponent. Not Larry Bird demanding the ball. Not Larry Bird walking toward the locker room after another victory. Just Larry Bird standing among reminders of a life that happened decades earlier. And perhaps that is where aging becomes most visible. Not necessarily in illness. Not necessarily in weakness. But in memory. You begin to realize that the years you once thought were the present have become history. The people you competed against are older. The teammates you celebrated with have changed. The arenas look different. The game has changed. And the young player you once were exists now only in photographs and recordings. Bird himself once said he wished his career had lasted longer. At the opening of his museum, he reflected that injuries had started mounting and said he believed the Celtics could have won at least one more championship. That comment is revealing. Even after everything he accomplished, part of him still looked back at what might have been. That is another reality of aging. You do not only remember what you achieved. You remember what you did not get to finish. The championship that never came. The season that ended too early. The game you wish you could replay. The body that gave you everything until suddenly it didn't. And for Larry Bird, perhaps the hardest part was that his career ended while he still believed there was more basketball inside him. But eventually, the game moved on. So did he. And now, at 69, the question is no longer what Larry Bird can do on a basketball court. He already answered that question. The more interesting question is what remains when the court is gone. Because the final chapter of a sports legend is rarely about statistics. It is about identity. It is about family. It is about memory. It is about deciding what parts of the old life you want to carry forward and what parts you are willing to leave behind. And Larry Bird appears to have chosen something he rarely had during his playing career. Distance. A quieter life. Less responsibility. Less pressure. But quiet does not mean empty. And the next chapter of his story may be the most revealing of all. Because when the world remembers Larry Bird, it usually remembers the player at his peak. It remembers the championships, the rivalries, the impossible shots, the swagger, the number 33. But the man who remains after all of that is something different. He is older. His body carries the consequences of a career that demanded almost everything from it. And his life is no longer measured by how many points he can score. Now, the question is what it feels like to look back at everything you once were, and to realize that the greatest season of your life is already behind you. There is a strange thing about becoming older when the world remembers you as young. For Larry Bird, millions of people still picture the same man. The blonde-haired forward in a Celtics uniform. Number 33. Standing at the free throw line. Looking completely certain that the next shot was going in. That version of Larry Bird never gets older. The footage keeps him frozen in his prime. The photographs do the same thing. Every replay brings him back. 25 years old. 30 years old. Standing in the middle of a packed Boston garden while thousands of people wait to see what he will do next. But the real Larry Bird kept moving through time. And today, at 69, his life is far removed from the intensity that once surrounded him. That does not mean his life is tragic. It means it is different. And perhaps that difference is what people miss when they look only at the legend. Bird has kept much of his personal life away from the public eye. He has been married to Dinah Mattingly since 1989. And he has children and grandchildren. He has generally chosen a quieter existence away from the constant attention that followed him during his NBA career. That privacy matters. Because fame can create the illusion that the public knows someone simply because it has watched them for decades. But knowing a player's statistics is not the same as knowing the person. Knowing how many championships he won is not knowing what his mornings look like. Knowing the shot he hit against a rival is not knowing what he thinks about when he looks back at his life. And Bird has never appeared particularly interested in turning his private world into entertainment. That may be one reason his later years can feel almost strange to people who remember his playing days. He is still Larry Bird, but he is no longer constantly visible. His connection to basketball remains. The Pacers have continued to honor him. The Celtics have continued to celebrate him. And the NBA has continued to place him among the greatest players ever. In 2024, Bird was honored through the opening of the Larry Bird Museum in Terre Haute, Indiana. The museum gave fans something that television highlights never could. A chance to walk through the different stages of his life. From Indiana, to Indiana State, to Boston, to the NBA, to retirement, to the years afterward. And there is something almost uncomfortable about seeing an entire life compressed into a museum. A childhood becomes photographs. A career becomes jerseys. Championships become trophies behind glass. Moments that once felt like the present become historical objects. That is what happens eventually to every athlete. The game keeps going. The person grows older. The achievements become exhibits. But Bird's story is unusual because he never needed basketball to prove that he was important. He had already done that. The numbers are permanent. The championships are permanent. His 3 MVP awards are permanent. His rivalry with Magic Johnson is permanent. The 1980s Celtics are permanent. His place in basketball history is permanent. His body, however, is not. That distinction becomes more meaningful with every passing year. The physical limitations that became obvious toward the end of Bird's playing career did not simply disappear when he retired. His back problems were serious enough to help end his career early, and he has spoken publicly about physical things he can no longer do as he once did. At 60, he talked about missing the ability to run several miles because of his back. That was not the statement of someone claiming to be helpless. It was the statement of an older athlete acknowledging that his body had changed. And that is probably the most honest way to understand Bird's later years. Not as a tragedy, not as a fairy tale, but as aging. The same process every athlete eventually faces. The legs slow down. Recovery takes longer. Old injuries remain old injuries. Activities that once required no thought suddenly require consideration, and the body becomes less predictable. For Larry Bird, that contrast is especially powerful because his entire public image was built around physical and mental toughness. He was the player who played through pain, the player who would take punishment and keep competing, the player who seemed offended by the idea that something might be impossible. But age does not care about reputation. It does not care about championships. It does not care how many times you have already overcome adversity. Eventually, everyone has to negotiate with the limits of the body. Bird has also had to experience something that many former athletes describe in different ways: watching younger generations take over the game. When Bird was playing, he was one of the people defining what basketball looked like. Now, he is part of its history. Young players who grew up watching LeBron James or Stephen Curry may know Bird mainly through clips. They may know the name. They may know the championships. They may know that he was one of the greatest. But they did not experience the anticipation of watching him play in real time. They did not hear the crowd react when Bird found an impossible passing angle. They did not feel the tension of a Celtics-Lakers game in the 1980s. They did not watch Bird and Magic turn basketball into something that reached far beyond the sport. For those fans, Bird is history. For Bird, those years were his life. And that creates one of the strangest experiences of getting older. The world remembers you as a symbol. You remember yourself as a person. You remember the mistakes, the injuries, the teammates, the losses, the moments nobody else saw, the things you wish had happened differently, the people who helped you get there, and perhaps most importantly, you remember how young you actually were. Bird has occasionally spoken with the perspective that comes with age. At the opening of his museum, he reflected on his career and even wondered whether the Celtics could have won another championship if injuries had not interfered. That kind of reflection feels very different coming from a 69-year-old man than it would have coming from a player in his 20s. There is no season left to fix, no playoff series waiting, no chance to add another trophy. The past is fixed. All you can do is remember it. And that may be the emotional center of Larry Bird's later life. Not that he lost everything. He didn't. He has his family. He has his connection to basketball. He has the respect of the sport. He has a career that very few people in history can match. There was a time when Larry Bird walked onto a basketball court and made grown men nervous. He did not need to be the fastest player. He did not need to jump the highest. He did not have the most athletic body in the league. He had something else. He knew what was going to happen before almost everyone else did. A defender could be standing directly in front of him, and Bird would already know where the pass was going. He could look one direction and throw the ball somewhere else. He could shoot from a distance that seemed unreasonable for his era. And when the game became tense, when the clock was running down and everyone in the building knew who was going to take the shot, Bird somehow seemed even more comfortable. For years that was Larry Bird. The cold-blooded competitor. The Boston Celtics superstar. The man who could insult an opponent with a sentence and then back it up on the court. The player who turned his rivalry with Magic Johnson into one of the defining stories in NBA history. 3 championships. 3 regular season MVP awards. 2 finals MVP awards. 12 All-Star selections. And a place among the greatest basketball players the sport has ever produced. But there is something about watching old footage of Bird today that feels different. You see the blonde hair. The familiar number 33. The Celtics uniform. The confidence. The passing. The shooting. The way he seemed to control the entire rhythm of a game. And then you remember something. That man is no longer 25. Now he is 69 years old. And that makes the contrast even more striking. Because the Larry Bird people remember is frozen in time. The older Larry Bird is not. The body that once absorbed years of professional basketball has aged. The career that once seemed like it might continue forever ended decades ago. The arenas became quieter. The crowds moved on to new stars. And the man who spent his youth challenging everyone around him eventually had to confront the one opponent that never loses. It is the story of what happens after the photographs, after the championships, after the final buzzer. It is about what happened when Larry Bird stopped being an NBA player and had to become Larry Bird the person. And to understand why that transition matters, you have to go back to where everything started. French Lick. Indiana. Bird grew up in a working-class family in a small Indiana community where basketball was more than entertainment. It was part of the culture. As a teenager, he became the local phenomenon everyone came to watch. He was not built like the modern superstar. But even early on, there was an unusual quality to him. He could see the game. He understood angles. He understood space. He understood people. At Indiana State, that intelligence turned him into a national star. Then came Boston. When Bird entered the NBA with the Celtics in 1979, Boston was not simply getting another talented player. It was getting the centerpiece of a franchise that desperately needed direction. Bird changed everything. He became an all-star almost immediately. He helped transform Boston into a championship contender. And over the next decade, the Celtics became one of the most important teams in basketball. Then came Magic Johnson. Bird and Magic had already met in the 1979 NCAA championship game, when Magic's Michigan State team defeated Bird's Indiana State team. The NBA rivalry that followed became something much larger. Bird represented Boston. Magic represented Los Angeles. Bird was direct, sarcastic, and fiercely competitive. Magic brought a different energy, a smile, a showman's confidence. Their rivalry was personal without needing to be hateful. They pushed each other. And together, they helped turn the NBA into a national spectacle. But while fans saw the highlights, Bird's body was absorbing the cost. Basketball at that level is not gentle. There were collisions, falls, long seasons, playoff battles, repetitive strain, injuries that players often tried to play through. Bird's career eventually showed the consequences. In 1988, surgery to remove bone spurs from both heels limited him to only 6 games the following season. Later, a compressed nerve root in his back caused him to miss 22 games during the 1990-91 season. The back problem became serious enough that it ultimately contributed to the end of his playing career. Yet even near the end, Bird kept producing moments that seemed impossible. On March 15, 1992, only months before retirement, Bird played 54 of 58 minutes against Portland while dealing with chronic back pain. He scored 49 points. He grabbed 14 rebounds. He delivered 12 assists. And Boston won in double overtime. It was the kind of performance that explained everything about Larry Bird. His body was telling him to stop. His mind refused. But eventually, even Larry Bird had to listen. On August 18, 1992, at just 35 years old, Bird announced his retirement from the NBA. He had played 13 seasons for Boston and finished with 21,791 points, 8,974 rebounds, and 5,695 assists. The timing is important. Bird did not retire because basketball had become boring. He retired because his body could no longer give him what the game demanded. And that may have been one of the hardest adjustments imaginable for someone whose entire identity had been built around refusing to give in. For years, Bird had been the player who found another way. A different shot. A different pass. Another possession. Another comeback. Another night when everyone thought he was finished and he proved them wrong. But there is no comeback against aging. There is no final quarter in which you can suddenly turn the game around. There is no timeout that can stop the clock. After retirement, Bird's relationship with basketball changed. He initially worked with the Celtics in a limited front office role, while spending much of the next several years in Florida and playing golf. Later, he returned to serious basketball work, eventually becoming president of basketball operations for the Indiana Pacers. He stepped away from that position in 2012, returned in 2013, and moved into an advisory role in 2017. The superstar had become an executive. The competitor had become an advisor. The man who once controlled games from the floor was now helping shape them from outside the court. And somewhere along the way, something else happened. The world kept moving. New players appeared. New rivalries replaced the old ones.